when writing or placing your dots onto single voice notes, notes that belong to a melody that just has a single voice line, not like two melodies happening simultaneously, which I'll show you too. Regardless of the type of note, whether it's a whole note or a half note or a quarter note or an eighth note, etc., dots will always be placed on notes that have the note head on the space. The dot will always be placed directly to the right of it. When they happen on a line, though, they clearly couldn't be placed on the line because that would obscure the dot. It would be difficult to read that. So typically, they go up to the next space. So up for a note on a line, and directly over for a note on a space. This G right here is on a space, so the dot goes directly to the right. This B, however, is on a line, so the dot goes to the right, but up above the line, or in the next space, the C area's space, if you will. This D, below the bass clef, would be on a space if we were to expand the concept here. So the dot will go just to the right, or due east, and this C above the bass clef is on a line, so the dot has to go up. The B here is on a space, so the dot can go directly to the right without any obstruction. Here's an example of how the augmentation dots work when there's two voices on a given stave. This example in D minor, it's just really an expansion possibility here in the key of D minor. Let's assume that this was written for soprano, alto, tenor, and bass. And if we did that, notice that all of voice layer 1, or the upper voices, in this case the sopranos, and in the bass clef the tenors, they're all considered voice layer 1, the upper voice. So their stems point up. And the dots are going to act just as we knew them from before. So if the note is on a space, the dot will go directly to the right. If the note's on a line, the dot will go up and to the right. Dots still always go to the right, of course. But notice in voice layer 2, whenever a note is on a space, the dot still continues to go directly to the right. However, when you're in voice layer 2, and a note has its note head on the line, or on any given line of the staff, the dot does not go to the right and up. In fact, it goes to the right and down. This is the proper way to notate this. So in this case, the altos right here have their dots below. This gives an indication visually, immediately, that this is a voice layer 2 entity. So dots go down here, dots go down here, and here. When we're writing the augmentation dots for unisons, there's two different methods that we use to do that, and it's very important as to which one you choose to use because it will convey something different if you do it wrong or incorrectly. So whenever we're dealing with unisons that involve a single voice, like for instance, let's say two sopranos are singing these A's, they're split. Sopranos 1, sopranos 2, or two violins are going to play the same pitches exactly. So some exact same instrument is going to be split in a way that causes unisons to occur. When that happens in a single voice setting, we want to have a dot for each note. I know on the guitar it's very common to play two of the exact same notes. For instance, I could play this G, at least written, on my 3rd string open, but I could also play it on my 4th string 5th fret, my 5th string 10th fret, and even the 6th string if I wanted to at the 15th fret, causing both of those notes to sound at the same time. I'm still one instrument playing both of those notes, so it's written in a single voice. Those are some possibilities of how that could occur. Again, violin could do things like this too. So when that happens, they're going to share a stem like we talked about before back in the notes chapter, but we have to have a dot for each one of the notes. So for instance, if I want a single dot on these A's, I need to have the one directly to the right and one, believe it or not, beneath it to indicate that both of these notes are going to be a dotted whole note, or they split when notes are on lines. So one above, one below. That would indicate that this is a single voice setting, like maybe I'm playing this by myself on a guitar, and I want both of these to be dotted quarter notes for a dotted quarter note value. Same here. Notice with 2 dots works in the same way, or 3 dots, same way, or more dots. So anytime there's a dot written for each one of the 2 notes, it indicates that these augmentation dots are being used or being done in a single voice setting. Like a single instrument, essentially, is responsible for all the notes in question. However, when you're doing this in a multi-voice setting, let's hypothesize that altos and sopranos, although they're both human, they're both different voice ranges. We're playing this. Or maybe I'm playing one of these notes on the guitar and I'm going to sing the other one. That would be a little tough for me at that particular pitch, but one could do such a thing. Or let's say 2 different instruments are converging to play these 2 different notes at the same time. Maybe a violin and a clarinet are going to both play these Gs. When that happens in multi-voiced settings, only a single dot is necessary. They will share the dot to convey that both of these notes are going to be dotted whole notes in this case. Both of these notes will be dotted whole notes. The same rules apply as to where to place them when you're writing just a single note with a single dot, not to be confused with this one. Obviously, when notes are stemless, like whole notes, there's no need to have a stem. That's how we know the difference between whether they're multi-voiced or single-voiced here. Multi-voiced notes that have stems always share them in flipped locations. So the lower voice stem down, upper voice stem up, and they still share the dot. Same here, same with multiple dots. So not to be confused with this kind of a setting, it's a bit different. So these, just sharing the dot, conveys that the notes are in a multi-voiced setting. 2 different instruments are responsible for playing these notes that have dots here, where a single instrument is responsible for playing the dots in this single-voiced setting. Our augmentation dots in compound meter. Meter where the primary beat units are divisible by 3 at the first level of subdivision. So for instance, if I'm in 6/8 time, I've got 2 beats per measure. 1, 2. 1, 2. And they're going to subdivide into thirds at the first level of subdivision. 1, 2. 1, 2. That is what one can anticipate in 6/8 time, barring something unusual or some strange syncopation or some other variation on that. It's just what one can anticipate in 6/8 time. It's duple compound meter. So an example in 6/8 time could be something like this. Since the dotted quarter note is the primary beat unit, or is the note that gets a single beat, we don't usually want to double dot that or add anything else to it. These usually just sit as a single dot. In fact, in any compound meter, 6/8, 6/4, 12/8, 9/8, 12/4, 12/16, 9/16, etc., 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 all compound meter naturally, at least naturally, features primary beat units, things that get 1 beat, as augmented, as featuring an augmentation dot. So all primary beat units get a single dot in compound meter naturally. So if we did try to double dot a primary beat unit in any compound meter, it can get very messy. So for instance, if I really felt compelled to write a double dotted primary beat unit, what this is telling me is that this second dot is worth half the value of the first dot, or 1 plus 0.5. That works out excellently in simple meter, but 1 1/2 beats doesn't pan out very well in compound meter because we typically divide into threes. We want 1/3 of a beat. So what would happen if we did this would be exactly the same as writing this. We'd be dividing the second beat into 2 eighth notes, which is very unusual. I like to write it with a ratio personally. The 2 would be fine too. But 2 eighth notes in the space of 3 eighth notes is how you'd write that, and then of course that would be tied. This would be very odd to have in compound meter naturally. If you wanted to write this, and it can happen, it's not unheard of by any means, it's just not typical in compound meter, but if it was to happen, I would strongly encourage you to write it this way with the tie, just making up for the dot. It would avoid a lot of confusion and make it a lot simpler to read when just scanning music. If this was to happen frequently, I would probably change the meter and possibly the tempo, depending on what you're trying to do, and then you would also circumvent any particular problems with double dotted notes as primary beat units and compound meter. That's about all I'm getting at with that. So, other than the primary beat unit, the thing that gets one beat in compound meter always features an augmentation dot. You can have, at different levels of subdivision, augmentation dots, and that's not uncommon. So for instance, in 6/4 time, the dotted half note is to receive one beat. That's just normally what gets one beat in 6/4 time. A good example is Ravel's Bolero, for instance. So the second beat would be comprised of, by itself, 3/4 notes. That would be the first level of subdivision of this, or this would subdivide into this for an entire beat. 1/3 of a beat each. Each note is worth 1/3 of a beat. But if we needed to, we could have a dot on one of these notes at this level of subdivision because this pans out pretty evenly. We can cut this in half to get one of these. And this isn't terribly uncommon to do. So at that level of subdivision, we can do such a thing. Down here in 9/8 time, the dotted quarter note gets one beat. Here's the first level of subdivision. We could count on 3/8 notes making up one beat of space. Here, the equivalent of 3/8 notes is taking place here. Here I've got a dotted 8th note and a 16th note to follow. That would make up one entire beat. This wouldn't be terribly uncommon. This is a fairly fine thing to do. Same thing with 12/8 time. We've got 4 beats per measure, of course, where the dotted quarter note is equal to one beat. So each of these beat units are worth a dotted quarter note. This one features a dot on the first 8th note, so a 16th note follows to make up the difference, and there's the other 1/3 of a beat. So in essence, well, that comprises one entire beat. Over here, we've got 2 dots. I just arbitrarily wrote this in. So to follow that, we'd have a 16th note, and then finally an 8th note, and we get one entire beat here as well. So dots feature themselves in compound meter much more frequently, other than the primary beat unit, which is extremely common, of course. They feature themselves much more frequently in the subdivisions of compound meter, after the first level of subdivision at least. And then it's not so messy to work with, like this example up here. Double or triple dotted primary beat units would be something I would want to stay away from. And note here too, that rests primary beat unit rests especially, are very popular in compound meter. You want to try to stay away from using the augmentation dots with rests in simple meter, such as 4/4, or even asymmetric meter like 5/4, unless there's some strong reason to do so. But in compound meter, especially at the primary beat unit level, like in 6/4 time, a dotted half rest would be a very popular thing to see. It's just a common thing to see. Or in, say, 6/16 time, where the dotted 8th note is the primary beat unit, a dotted 8th note rest would be a very, very popular rest to see, because that equals exactly one beat in 6/16 meter. So I hope that this helps to clarify dots, the augmentation dot, a little bit with you.